Hello, everyone. This is section 15, assessing electronic resources and for accessibility results from a pilot project at the University of Washington. My name is Trina Nolan. I'm going to be moderating this session. I am from the Grants Committee, ER&L Grants Committee. I'm going to pass the mic around at the end of the session if you have questions, but I'll also be reading the questions for anyone who's participating online.
Thank you. Let me make sure this is pointing in the right direction. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're all here. I have some slides here. I put the bit.ly URL if you want to open that up or take that home. I tried to download these from the Dropbox, and there was some kind of error. So if you want to look at the slides, you can go to that bit.ly link. Okay. So there have already been a couple of sessions about accessibility this morning. I'm not sure if you all were there, but some really good information from those. And it's going to overlap a little bit with what I was going to say. I'm going to go ahead and say it anyways, because you can't say this stuff enough. It's very important work. So first, I wanted to give an introduction to accessibility. Why is it important? It seems kind of self-evident, but there are actually many reasons that are important to look at for why. Then I'll look at what is web accessibility. What does that mean? Then how do you test for web accessibility? There's a lot of things to take into account there. I'll go over some tools. The No Mouse Challenge I want to plug. I'll get into that later. And then finally I'll talk about the project we did at the University of Washington and the results that and conclusions we draw from that. And this logo is this is the No Mouse logo for a little color. So why should we strive for accessibility? First and foremost, in my mind, it's a civil rights issue. We want to include everyone. There are federal civil rights laws that ensure equal opportunities for people with disabilities. And it's always important to listen to people with disabilities and not just talk about them, but listen to them. So I have a video I wanted to play. Speaking of accessibility, the mouse on this is just a little red button, and it's very difficult to use. Okay.
Hashtag why describe.
When people tell me that they don't have time to be accessible, that's a choice they're making, and in doing so, they're communicating who can take part in that discussion. My name is Cindy, and I'm a student at the University of Washington studying a subject called human-centered design. I'm in my late 20s, and I am a white woman who also identifies as blind and disabled. As far as social media goes, I use it a lot for personal social networking as well as professional networking. I use a series of gestures and keyboard commands that allow me to explore content non-visually.
Cynthia swipes through an app on her phone.
So I've just gone through like 5 or 6 tweets in the same time. I feel like it took me to read a couple of tweets at human speed or slower. Our history is characterized by systematic isolation. People with disabilities have not been given the means to gather and organize except in the past few decades. And so for people with disabilities, social media is extremely liberating to help us connect with other people. Audio description and captioning can totally help us both prioritize and reimagine digital and visual media. We all need to take responsibility for making the world more accessible, and companies and agencies that already have power need to take the lead. It doesn't have to be bad. Like, consider it yourself lucky that you get to prioritize the important content. All of your viewers will appreciate it.
Produced by Rooted in Rights.
Okay, so that was focused more on social media, but it really applies to all of the content that we have at the libraries as well. It's not just social, but enrichment, education, everything. So I thought that particularly her last point there, where we all need to take responsibility for making the world more accessible, And companies and agencies that already have power, that includes libraries, need to take the lead. If that's not enough to convince you to consider accessibility in your work, there's plenty of legal issues that have come up in the last few years. The session this morning talked a lot about the Pion versus Los Angeles Community College District, where the conclusions from that case were quite scary for us in the library community. It basically said that we could not provide access to electronic resources unless they were fully accessible to the latest standards, which, if you look at that, it's actually 0 things were at the time were accessible to that level, mainly because that level, that 2.1, WCAG 2.1, had actually just been released, so nobody was actually compliant at that moment, but it's a big deal, and a lot of people are kind of panicking about that. So, and then in the other cases as well, the inaccessible library resources cited in complaints include websites, databases, and an online catalog system, so everything. I'm going to focus on web accessibility today. And what does that mean? According to the W3C page on accessibility, usability, and inclusion, it means that people with disabilities can equally perceive, understand, navigate, and interact with websites and tools. It also means they can contribute equally without barriers. And I think that back and forth is really important to consider. It's not just pulling the information, but also interacting and contributing. I wanted to step back for a minute and just mention these various standards and all the acronyms. There can be a lot. So the World Wide Web Consortium, the W3C, made this Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, or Y, some people say. And then they created the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which you can say WCAG. And the latest standard is 2.1. I think a lot of people are still using 2.0 as their threshold, but 2.1 is here now, and we should start striving for that. I wanted to talk a little bit, what is this WCAG standard? People say that a lot, but what does that really mean? I'll take a few minutes. There's 4 principles: the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Some people refer to as POUR. I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then for each of those guidelines, there are testable success criteria, which you could meet at A, AA, or AAA levels. So like, it kind of worked, that's an A. Worked pretty good, that's AA. It was perfect, that's AAA. Of course, we want to strive for perfection, but we all know in reality that we just can't be perfect all the time. So a lot of people aim for the AA qualifications there. And then I included a link to how to meet the WCAG standard, a quick reference guide. I'm not going to open it right now, but if you download the slides, you can take a look at that later or just Google it. So POUR, I have some text written. I'm going to read. So perceivable means information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways they can perceive, so not just see, but somehow take into their brain. This means that users must be able to perceive the information being presented. It can't be invisible to their senses. And operable user interface components and navigation must be operable. This means that users must be able to operate the interface. The interface cannot require interaction that a user cannot perform. Oops. I have an issue with this mouse. Sorry. I can't scroll down on my thing, but understandable means the information and operation of user interface must be understandable. You must be able to process it. And then robust just means that it has to be able to be the same in different platforms, different interfaces, computers, laptops, phones, using different accessibility softwares. It all should work the same in all the different areas. Okay, so then how do we test for this web accessibility? We know there's all these standards, so how do we check the websites for these standards? Well, none of us are, well, maybe some of us are programmers. I'm not a programmer. It's hard to completely understand what's happening without some knowledge. So there are some tools that can help you. Accessibility bookmarklets is a very easy thing. You go to the, if you follow the link or you can Google it, you just go to a page and you basically drag this little tool onto your bookmark toolbar, and now you can use it. You just click on that on any page. Once you click on that new link you've made, it'll highlight certain areas of the web page to give you information about it. I'll show you a screenshot soon. There's another app called Totally, which is just slightly more difficult to get. It's a add-on. This link will take you to the add-on on Firefox. There's one for Chrome. And that is another little interface where you just click on it and it starts to highlight, based on your selections, different aspects of a web page. You can use a screen reader such as NVDA. It's a free screen reader. I'll give you a little quick sample of that later too. And keyboard testing, I'm going to focus more on that because that's just using your keyboard and no mouse to see if you can do all of the things that you would normally do with a mouse. And then I'm not going to talk about these others, but there are a lot of accessibility products out there, speech to text, word prediction, something called sip and puff, which I just learned about, where you use your mouth, your breath control to control like a cursor kind of thing. It's very, very cool. So here's our University of Washington Libraries webpage. And then if I get the bookmarklets and turn them on, you can see now that various areas of the webpage are outlined in different colors. I apologize, it's probably hard to see from where you are, but you can see that the top where it says home, start your research, use the libraries, etc., is outlined in a dark box, and then there's a little text that says UL. That means that's an unordered list. And then there's other areas in kind of a yellow-green that have H2 down there where it says start your research. That means it's been formatted to be heading 2 in the code. So you don't have to know what the code looks like. If you see this visually, you go, oh, okay, the code is telling us that there's headings, there's lists, and screen readers use that information to present the information. So this is a visual representation of what a screen reader might be talking about. This is the Totally app, add-on, browser add-on. When you download it and turn it on, there's just a little box in the bottom left corner. And when you click on it, it expands. That's what all that black area is on the left. And you can select different things that you want to look at. In this case, I've selected contrast. And then it'll highlight different areas where it sees color contrast and tells you if it's acceptable or not. In this case, it looks like our university library's color contrast is slightly less than acceptable. So it's got a little caution sign and a 1.25, and then more information in the pop-up down there. I wanted to give a brief demo of a screen reader. I don't know if any of you have used a screen reader before. It is very overwhelming when you first open it and try it out. So I'm just going to do a quick 43-second demo to give you an example of what that is like. If I can. Okay. So at first I'm turning it on, and now it's going to start working.
Welcome to NVDA speech.
So, okay, I'm going to click on University Libraries to get it started there.
University Libraries, University of Washington, Mozilla Firefox. University Libraries, University of Washington. Banner landmark heading level 1 University of Washington Libraries. Link skip to primary content. Visited link University of Washington. Visited link University Libraries. Navigation landmark link my UW link calendar link maps link directories. Main menu navigation landmark menu visited link home. Menu item collapsed start your research. Menu item collapsed use the libraries. Menu item collapsed help and support. Menu item collapsed about.
Okay, that's enough of that. But you could hear at one point it said menu
Welcome
items.
to NV.
No, don't do it again. You could hear it, maybe you heard it say heading 1, landmark item, list item. These are the things that we saw in the bookmarklets that were circled in those boxes. So the screen reader uses that same code to read the content. Why is that important? That same code is also how you can do keyboard testing. When you use your keyboard without a mouse, you have some instruction. It follows a path based on the code. Sorry, I'm a little distracted by this. Okay. So keyboard testing is easy to learn. It's easy to use. There's no software to download. And generally speaking, if a website is accessible using a keyboard, it will also work with the various assistive technologies. I have a quote here. An accessible website does not rely on the mouse. It makes all functionality available from a keyboard. Then people with disabilities can use assistive technologies that mimic the keyboard, such as speech input. Here are some, this is basically all you need to know about keyboard testing. There's not that much. Tab is to move forward, Shift tab is to move back, and then Enter and space and arrows to do the other elements of a web page. The last one I want to say, escape, says close the current modal dialog. That's like a pop-up. So sometimes there'll be a pop-up, you need to get out of there. Escape should work to close that. Sometimes it doesn't. Here's a plug for the No Mouse Challenge that's developed by, at the University of Washington Accessibility Center. You can go to that page, it'll give you some tips, like the instructions that I just had on the previous screen. And they encourage everyone to use the hashtag No Mouse and talk about what you find if you try this. Okay, good. All of that to say that we, at the University of Washington, decided to do a pilot project. I was hired in late 2017 as the collection assessment librarian there, which means a lot of data, usage statistics, all that kind of good stuff, but also some qualitative assessment. In this case, accessibility. So it was a new position. There was no leadership. I was the one to do it, and I didn't know anything very much yet. So I was like, okay, we'll just set a goal of let's increase the percentage of accessible resources at the university. Easy peasy. Okay, so that's a problem. How many of our subscribed electronic resources are not accessible? If you just go to our databases list, A to Z, the 622, how are we supposed to find out which of them are accessible and which are not? So take a step back. What do we need to think about? How much staff time do we have? For many of us, it's not very much, about half of my position, and I have a student employee. It's not very much time to spend on this. A lot of the tools I just went over, we have a bunch of tools and resources, but they require some specialized training. Speech readers, difficult to use. It's retention of training, like if you don't use something for a while, you forget. Maybe you want to get a student employee who, get a new one every quarter, you have to train them again and again. So we decided just to do keyboard testing because it's so easy, and it has such a big result. If it's keyboard accessible, then that usually means it's accessible in all the other tools. Understanding, of course, that this is just a minimal test. It's not the ideal test. I'm not testing for color contrast or image captioning, captions, image descriptions, all this stuff. There's a lot you can test for, but what we decided to do is that we really just needed to do some usability tests. So rather than testing for everything, we wanted to know, can you achieve the main functions of this resource just using the keyboard? That's the bare minimum. So our process was you visit the resource, so we went to the A to Z list, clicked on one, figure out what are the main functions of this resource, and then use keyboard navigation to achieve those results. If all the main functions can be achieved, then we would consider it technically accessible. So what are some main functions? Most commonly, electronic journal databases, it's to search. It's to retrieve a result, a search result like PDF or something, and use the result. Can you scroll through the pages? Can you download it? Read it in general. Streaming media, can you search? Can you play the result? Can you control the result? So like move the slider, control the volume, and are there captions or audio descriptions? That's hard to tell. Sometimes it's not consistent through the whole resource. And then we have some specialty databases, business, chemistry. Sometimes there's some that are very, like I just don't know what they're supposed to do. So in that case, I would work with the subject librarian that's an expert in that area and work with them to do the testing. So like I said, this is only testing the most basic form of accessibility, but we really just want to know what is impossible for people to use and what are, at this point, good enough. It's not ideal. We would love to do more, but we don't have the staffing. Something just fell off the screen. I think it's okay though. And even at this basic level of testing, it takes a lot of time. I'll show you a quick example. This is just a screenshot of the EBSCOhost eBooks interface. I did a search for earthquake. So I was able to use the tab. Sometimes when you start using the tab, you'll see this on the top left, it says skip to main content. And you wouldn't normally see that if you're using the mouse, but as soon as you hit tab, some of these interfaces will show that, which is great because then you can hit enter and the cursor will just move down to the search results or whatever the main content is of that particular page. So I was able to do the search and get the PDF and open it and turn pages. So yes, we say this is technically accessible. I was going to do a live demo, but I don't know if I trust it or if we have enough time. But if we have time at the end, maybe I can do one. Okay, here's an example of, unfortunately, a resource that is not technically accessible. I was using the tab. I did this one early on. I was using the tab, and the focus would move, from librarians to instructors along the top banner, and keep tabbing and tabbing, and the focus disappeared, and who knows where it went. After about 5 minutes of tabbing, I'm not kidding, it finally went into the search box, which I could then search. So I guess technically it's doable, but it's very frustrating. I did hit the search. I searched for, this is not a screenshot of once I did the search, but that's okay. And then once I got the search results, I was tabbing, trying to get into the search results to select one, and I could never get into the search result area. So that is not accessible. It's impossible to pull up a search result in this interface. So that's flagged as no. So we had 622 databases on that A to Z list. We've been doing this for about a year. Just myself and one of my students, not even full-time, it's just what we could do in the time we had. I had a student, she left for the summer. I got a new student, had to train. So it's like real life. We didn't throw a bunch of energy into this pilot. It was just like, what can a normal person do in a normal amount of time? So in about a year, we did 101 interfaces, which was 16% of our total interfaces. We were able to do 30 in a 1-month sprint. Let's really get some done, But we can't sustain that unless we had some more funding to hire more students, something like that. So our findings is that 20 of them were not technically accessible, and 81 were. And 4 of the 81 were yes, but, and I'll show you some text from the comments of that. And then we do have all these results linked in this Google Sheet. There's a link here. Again, I'll show the bit.ly URL for the slides, so you can have all these links at the end. Here's some text from the yes, but. The skip to main content option was present and appears, but does not work when selected. The user still has to tab between all options before reaching a search result, which takes a very long time. So that was yes, technically you could do it, but it took much longer than a mouse, so we don't really like that, but it's still technically accessible. Another one, a different database. On the home page, you can use tab and the up-down arrows to select a country, but you cannot do the same for the trade tools section. You can tab to trade tools, but if you use the up and down arrows to navigate the list, the page automatically redirects to the first list option. So that's not good. It still works if you just use tab, but as soon as you use the arrows, it breaks it, and that's not a good thing. So, what are some conclusions from this? I don't know if any of you have noticed this 80-20 rule before. It seems to pop up over and over. Or 80% of the work is good, but 20% takes the rest of your time. And anyway, that happened again here. 20% of our tested items were not accessible. Another conclusion is that this really takes a long time. And the problem with that, I'd be willing to commit to a long project, but interfaces change over time. You search something one year, you come back to it next year, and it can be different. So you really can't spend a lot of time on this because things are moving and changing. So really what I've concluded is that we cannot do this alone. Even, someone really motivated, it's just we can't do it alone. So I really want to emphasize that we need to collaborate on this. And I was really happy to hear the earlier presentation was saying the same thing. It's going to be really important if we want to make any changes that we got to work together. Another thing that we concluded was that many of the larger databases tended to be accessible, like EBSCO, ProQuest, Elsevier. So if you did want to do some local testing, you would want to focus on your smaller, more unique products that are unique to your library. And finally, we can influence vendors to improve accessibility. We can't control what they do. We're not in charge of their code. We can't fix it. So we need to talk to them about it. So what are some next steps? We need to collaborate on testing. There's some really good work being done at the Big Ten for accessibility testing. Some regional consortia. University of Washington is part of WILA, which has just sent some money to the Big Ten to help with the accessibility project. I have a couple of mailing lists here. The Accessible Lib at u.washington.edu is managed by myself and the accessibility coordinator at my institution, and it's a new mailing list, and we're really trying to grow it, so I'd encourage all of you to join. We're going to try to have some webinars and talks on there, advertised on that list. And then communicate with vendors. We need to share our findings. I did contact one, ABC Clio eBooks. They had an inaccessible webpage. I emailed them, and they got back to me and said they fixed it. It's like, they want to help. We want to work together. They just don't always know. We haven't thought about this before. So just bringing up the conversation is really helpful. Raising awareness of what's happening and letting people know that it's important to us is going to help. Here's some questions you can ask a vendor. Just step right across the street here and start. I apologize in advance to any vendors in the room for the traffic you're about to get, but you can ask, can you perform all these functions without a mouse? Do you have captions? Do you have accessibility documentation? What are your plans for improving accessibility? I'm not going to read all of it. We're running out of time, and I know you guys have some questions, so I don't leave time for that. And we just need to raise awareness, increase the visibility of this. You don't have to be an expert in accessibility to have a conversation with a vendor about it. I know when I first started doing this work, I was like, oh, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know what I'm talking about. But just saying, it's important to us. It's important to our campus. I want to know what your plans are is enough. And the more of us who bring it up, the more momentum it builds. And finally, universal design is just good design. I was up here and there's no mouse and I have to use this weird little red button, and I was able to use keyboard navigation just now during the presentation to still be comfortable giving the presentation. Or, when I had a shoulder issue one time and I couldn't use the mouse, so keyboard navigation was really important. It could happen to any of us. I don't have a lot of time left, so I'm just going to skim this section. I kind of have been focusing on what we already have, but we can bring accessibility into the procurement process as well. You can discuss accessibility during a trial. You can mention it during negotiations. You can put accessibility language in a license. I'm not going to read this whole paragraph, but basically just saying that libraries have a lot of power to ask our vendors to make accessible products. I'm not going to read this either, but for those of you who work with licenses, here's some license language that you could incorporate into your license. It's not always easy. There's some pushback often, but it's a starting place to start the conversation. And this text is taken from the Big Ten Alliance. It's on their website. So, questions? All right. We will bring the microphone around. It's a accessibility thing to do that, as well as for the streaming audience.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, did you make any deselection decisions based on the results?
We have not yet, but I think we're about to. We have to make a large cut this year to our electronic resource subscription, so we were looking at 4 news databases that we subscribe to. 2 of them are good, and 2 of them are kind of equally in third place. And one of them has a poor accessibility. So we might cut that one, everything else being equal. It's not decided yet, but.
Thank you.
I was wondering, at my institution, one of the things that we've been focusing on is captioning all videos and that sort of thing. And one of the concerns we've had is materials we produced in the past, which didn't have captions at the time that they were made. And I was wondering if you have done anything like that with your internal materials and how you handled that.
Yeah, I haven't personally been involved in that work, but I know that there is work being done. I know a recent hire that we just made was in the digital media. He's developing a tool to automatically create captions, and it's not perfect, but we're kind of working on that. It is important to do that, but again, we only have so much time and money, so it's a very difficult problem. Yeah. Thank you. Did you have a question still? There's one over here. I think she was next, yeah.
I'm curious about the decision to do the accessibility testing yourselves versus taking your list and running it against, for example, the Big Ten Academic Alliance's existing database, especially considering that those tests that they've done, I think, are quite robust.
Yes.
So what was the motivator to do that in-house?
Yeah, so the Big Ten was getting started around the same time that we were making the plan for this pilot. At the time, they had about 10, I think. So we did go ahead and do the same ones just to see how our testing compared with theirs. Theirs is very robust. If you look at their results, tens of pages reports about the accessibility features, and it's kind of hard to digest. Like, what does this mean? Is this actually accessible or not? So we wanted to do our own testing also, just to see how our results would compare. And I know now they have something like 47, which is getting to be quite a lot. So if I was going to do this project again, I would just probably not test the ones that have already been done and focus on our smaller, unique resources.
Someone up here had a question.
I think that she... Yeah.
I was just wondering if you tried looking at ways of cutting down some of the volume of testing you need to do by looking at it instead of by individual resource, but by platforms. So I know you might have 600 resources,
Yeah.
but if 150 are EBSCO hosts,
Right.
they're all the same.
You would think. But it turns out that some resources, like we just tested a ProQuest database that must have been a more recent acquisition or something, because the interface was totally different and very bad. So if I had just said, oh, ProQuest is good, we're just going to skip all the ProQuest, we would have missed that one.
Let's say not by vendor, but by platform.
Oh, I
Because
see,
ProQuest
I
has
see,
multiple
yes.
platforms, but like for Gale, all their in-context resources are on the
Okay.
same platform.
Yeah, we did look at that. It's kind of hard to train a student on which ones are the same. So I told her, like, if there was one and it's obviously the same as one that you just did, you can just skip that. So we did try to cut down a little bit. 622 is probably an inflated number, but yeah, that's true.
Hi, thanks for the wonderful presentation. I want to know how's your experience with vendors? You mentioned ABC Clio, they fixed it right away. So is there any resistance, or is there something they said they can't change it right now, or
We haven't.
how was the response?
Okay, yeah. So ABC Clio is the only one that I have contacted yet. We wanted to get more data first and then come up with some kind of strategy. A lot of things were kind of developing while this pilot was happening. So it was like, let's just focus on the pilot, and then once it's over, we'll go from there. So we're going to start doing more contact now. Like I said, ABC Clio was great. They just said, oh, we had no idea that was a problem. We'll definitely fix that. And they fixed it within the week, so it was a nice response. I know that, I'm guessing that some of the more niche databases, smaller vendors, they probably don't even have the staff time to do development. I know I kind of picked on the AR music anthology, but I haven't contacted them, but just from the way their site looks, it hasn't really seemed like it hasn't changed a lot since it was maybe first developed. I don't know if they have. A lot of these are just like one person doing work. So we need to, don't approach, I'm not going to approach them like I'm going to fight you about this. It's like, how can we help you fix this problem? Like, I've been talking to some accessibility experts on my campus about how to do even more complex testing. So once we find something and we talk to the vendor and they respond like, that's great, but I don't know what's happening here, then I can do the more thorough testing on just that one and help, work together to make it better.
Okay, second question.
Oh, okay.
Okay, if I want to plan accessibility testing based on keyboard testing, what you recommend? What 4 or 5 parameters I should test?
Well, doing a search, like I said, can you do a search for a library resource? That's like key. Retrieving a result and interacting with the result. Can you do those things? Was that your question, or was there more to that?
No, I was specific, like what features I should test, what variables I should. If it's a journal-based database, we do searching. We just see how smooth it is going search-wise.
Okay, yeah. Maybe I can do a quick demo. Would that help?
Oh, yes, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let me, because I was hoping we'd have time for a quick demo. Let me go back to the. Yeah, one problem, I am a data-oriented person, and I want to be able to say yes or no. But one problem is that sometimes you just have to use your judgment. So for the tabbing, oh, come on. For the tabbing, does it take 10 tabs? Does it take 500 tabs? Like somewhere in there, you decide, okay, that's not, that's not good. I have to get here in a different way. If I can't talk and do my mouse at the same time, sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to start hitting tab. Like right away you can tell that the focus, which is it's supposed to show you where the focus is. They're supposed to be outlined or some way visual. Like this is unacceptable because you can't see where it is. And it's taking me a lot of tabs just to get to enter the website. When I'm hitting tab and you can kind of see the URL on the bottom left is changing. So you know it's moving, but it turns out if you look at it that it's just getting like stuck in these menus. Yeah, this is just not accessible. But yeah, as far as like, do we have any numbers? Like how many tabs should it take to get there? I don't have that kind of judgment call. So again, you tab forever and you finally get to this box, which I will click in, but like if I was going to tab, it would take about 5 minutes to cycle all the way through all the menus, all the way to the bottom. So that's an interesting thing. Like what is technically accessible and what is versus like functionally accessible? I can tab to this search box, so it's technically I can do a search, but functionally it's not accessible because it's just not acceptable. Like you shouldn't have to spend 5 minutes tabbing to do the same search that we could do in 1 second. Does that help? Okay. Oh.
Okay.
We might need to start making a line or something.
Hi.
Hi.
The Office of Civil Rights is reviewing my website right now,
Oh,
which
okay.
is the Tennessee Electronic Library, so it's statewide databases. And some of the things when that judgment call, for each of the databases in the description, it takes 4 tabs if you're using the tabbing, and they recommended that would be unnecessary and burdensome for somebody that has low mobility.
They said that for 4 tabs?
For 4 tabs per item. So the way that they said that if it created a very different experience compared to a mouse a mouse user. So that's kind of some of the things, but then they also talked about like PDFs and creating that navigation in any documentation that you create outside of that. So I just wanted to add, like, it's all very subjective.
It is very
And even they have no prescriptive tools or standards or methods for reviewing your websites. So it's really up to the person who's evaluating it.
Yeah.
So
I'm
yeah.
surprised at 4. That seems like a really low number to me, based on my experiences. But it's good to know.
Since you've started doing this testing, have you had experience putting the language in licenses
Yeah.
requiring accessible?
Yeah, we have
accessibility?
started putting licensed language in for our new products and renewing products. I'm not the licensed person, but I work closely with her. She's not here today, but we've had pretty good luck at least just putting at least a minimal thing. Most vendors, I think, would push back on that large chunk that I showed on the screen, but there's different levels. At least it's important to bring it up during licensing, even if you don't actually get it into the license. I think it's still valuable.
Do you, because websites react differently depending on the browser, how do you deal with that?
Right.
Or is it an issue with accessibility?
It should not be an issue, but it is sometimes. At least to be consistent, we only used Firefox. I can say that Chrome has some built-in accessibility features that actually make it harder to do the testing because they're trying to make it easier. And so it's hard for us to see where a site has some failings because Chrome has kind of fixed it for you. So Chrome is better to use if you're trying to use some kind of assistive technology, but Firefox is better for testing because it's more like pure. Ideally, it would not matter which browser you use. That's the robust part of the poor part. So, we had a question over here next. Susan over here.
Hi, this is new to me. So you've mentioned tabbing do keyboard testing. Are there other keys that do functions that you should be using while you're doing testing to see if they work as well? Or is it just all tabbing?
I can show this slide again if I can get to my other interface. It's mostly tabbing. Tab moves the cursor down the page, and then Shift Tab makes you go backwards on the page. Let's see where it is. There we go. Enter. If you've tabbed along and now the focus is on a link, Enter will activate the link, or button if it's a button. Space is how you do checkboxes. And then arrow keys can move between radio buttons or scroll the page. And then escape is to get out of a pop-up. We had one resource we were testing where it opened up a pop-up that you had to clear before you could do a search, but there was no way to get the pop-up to leave with just the keyboard, so that was a fail.
Are those pretty standardized, or do you just hunt around until you figure out what works?
This should work. This should be standard. Some code, they can write some unique code that will interfere with the keyboard navigation, in which case it is not accessible. It really should follow these rules.
We had an online question.
Oh, great.
Is anyone doing testing with user communities who rely heavily on adaptive or assistive technology?
I have not done testing with users at this time in my position, but we at the University of Washington have an area where they work very closely with students that use assistive technology. One more?
When you were searching, did you do any limiters, any Booleans? Were you able to test advanced search features?
I did not test advanced search features. That's a good question, though. I'd be interested to know if that would break more resources, because that's an important thing to be able to do.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mhm.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for coming.